everyone, and welcome to the Sports Gazette Six Nations special. I'm your host, Alex. I'm joined by the Sports Gazette's rugby editor, Xander Chevalier. How are you doing, Xander?
Very good, thank you, Alex. Very good, thank you.
Good to hear. Miles McDevitt, the Sports Gazette's horse racing editor, has also joined us today. He's managed to squeeze us in around the races at Cheltenham today. So thank you for joining us, Miles. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, on this Thursday evening.
Good man, good man. Been following your tips and you've put me up a few quid, so thanks for that. And Jeremy Adley as well, rugby writer from the Sports Gazette, is also with us this evening. So how are you doing, Jeremy? All good on your end?
Yeah, I'm all good, Alex. I'm all good.
Yeah, on the show today, we're going to be previewing the matches for Super Saturday this weekend in the Six Nations. We've got a discussion with Matthew Southcombe from Wales Online and Veronique Landew, who's the host of the French Rugby Connections podcast, coming up later to discuss France v Wales. So stay tuned for that. But first off, we're going to start with Ireland v England. It's an interesting matchup, this one. Both sides have lost 2 out of the 4 of their 4 matches so far. So they'll be looking to salvage something from the Six Nations and try and finish in the top half of the table. Jeremy, we'll start with Ireland as they're the home side. Quite a few changes for them. Dave Kilcoyne replaces Healy at loosehead. James Ryan's injured, so Tag Byrne moves into the second row, and then also Will Connors is out injured. He's replaced by Josh van der Fleer on the open side, and CJ Stander, who announced his retirement this week, moves to 6, and Jack Conan comes in at number 8. From that forward pack, from those changes there, what do you see as being lost from the forward pack from the absentees, and what do you think the new additions can add?
I mean, obviously, when you lose James Ryan, he's been one of the outstanding players for Ireland over the last year. So, I mean, his one-up running is just fantastic. He's very, very good ball carrier. He's very, very good as well when it comes to the breakdown. But I've always thought Ireland's problem hasn't really ever been the back row. I've always felt Ireland have got a very dynamic, very versatile back row. It's very, very deep. I mean, when you're talking about bringing in Josh van der Fleer as an injury replacement, I mean, that is some replacement to bring in. And, you know, when you look at the front 5, it's still very strong. Yes, Rob Herring isn't exactly the world's best hooker, but, you know, he's still pretty solid. You know, Tide Furlong is getting back to full health again. He's starting to look back to his best after he sidestepped a couple of people last week. So he's starting to look back to his best. My worry is not the pack. It never has been. Even now, when we're missing a couple of guys, it's still very, very strong, as seen last week. I mean, the line out last week was absolutely exceptional against Scotland. They completely destroyed theirs. And once the second half rolled around and we looked a little bit more structured, and you started to feel the game flow a little bit better for us. So yeah, I'm happy with the changes. I don't really think it'll cause too much of a detrimental impact for the game against England.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can already see the imprint of Paul O'Connell on that forward pack. Yeah, they've been a real disruptor at the line. As to the backs, I think that's probably an area you've got a few more grievances about. We've got Conor Murray coming in. He's back at scrum half, replacing Jameson Gibson Park, which I don't think you'll be too upset about. And then Gary Ringrose is obviously out injured as well. So Robbie Henshaw shifts to 13, and then Bundy Aki makes his first start of the championship at 12. Another change as well is Jacob Stockdale coming in on the left wing for James Lowe, who appears to have been dropped entirely. What do you make of those changes?
I mean, the Ringrose one was obviously a forced one, so Bundy Aki was probably the natural selection to come in. I mean, I'm happy for Bundy Aki to come in because I think sometimes Ireland's backline maybe does lack a little bit of a bullish feel to it. I think sometimes they don't. Yes, Robbie Henshaw's been fantastic this year, but I think Bundy Aki just gives us another problem for England to look at. I mean, Henshaw's a powerful runner, but he's also a very skillful player. He can play he's played anywhere in the back 3 before. So having someone who's going to attract maybe 1 or 2 more defenders, I think will help us in the back line. But it's been the problem all championship, really. I mean, you take Italy out, really. The problems for Ireland have been try scoring and it's been creating chances. And I like having Stockdale back. I think he's one player who can have one of those moments where he creates something out of nothing. I mean, we all remember that try he scored against New Zealand. So I'm happier he's back in. I think James Lowe was thrown in the deep end when we weren't playing well. And he sort of struggled all campaign. Keith Earls is Keith Earls. He'll score tries, but he'll not do anything too outstanding. It's been underwhelming. I think last week we finally saw the backline unleash its potential a wee bit more. I think the whole problem for Ireland just is if Ireland keep you below 21 points, they have a great chance of beating you. But if you go above the 21 point mark against Ireland, you probably will win. I think it's something, if you take the Scotland game, Italy game out, Ireland have scored 8 tries in 7 games or something like that. It's a horrendous record. So this back line against England is going to have to score tries. It's going to have to take advantage of the fact England haven't had a great tournament, but I'm not looking forward to it because I think England are starting to roll around the corner a little bit, and those Saracens players are starting to get, it feels like they've got the preseason out of the way and now they're back to their best. So I think this is going to be pretty good. I think, the tournament for Ireland is going to be summed up on this game. I mean, if Ireland win this game, then you turn around and say it's not been a bad tournament because you lost to France by 2 points and you lost to Wales down to 14 off the back of a bad kick. So Ireland's tournament is going to be summed up in this game, I think, whether it's going to be negative or positive. But I do like Bundy Aki coming in. I do think that's going to give us a real bit more ballast in midfield.
Do you think you can see sort of an attacking identity for this Irish team forming with Mike Catt and Andy Farrell at the helm? Obviously, at Mike Catt as the attack coach and Andy Farrell as the head coach.
I haven't seen enough games to see a game plan or a clear-cut formula. I still think Ireland's game plan is we're going to get 15 points on the board, 12, 15 points on the board through Sexton converting penalty goals. It's the case of, I think they don't really have a plan as to, well, they obviously have a plan, but I don't see a clear-cut one where I look at that back line and I go, the try-scoring threat is so-and-so. I mean, you look at different nations, like take England, Anthony Watts and Johnny May. You know the idea is to get those guys on one-on-one situations on the outside because they are very, very good at beating those guys and they're the best finishers in world rugby. Whereas I look at Ireland and I don't see exactly where that plan is. I see it goes to Sexton and then they do a couple of wraparound moves, a couple of moves out the back. But it's the same stuff. There's no go-to move. There's no seemingly any plan. I think there they have one play where they feel we'll run it once or twice and we'll get a really good goal try scoring opportunity out of this, or it will lead to a try eventually. I still think Ireland's main way of getting tries is through that pack. I still think it all comes down to, can the pack dominate at the line out and the breakdown? And if they do, then it will obviously open up chances for the back line. But I look at the back line as it has so much potential. I mean, yeah, we were going on about it. I mean, James Lowe coming into this tournament, I thought was going to have a great tournament. He's had a bad one. Ringrose and Henshaw have had good tournaments, but the tries haven't been there. Keith Earls usually scores a lot of tries, hasn't scored really any. So, it's been a stop-start tournament as well. I mean, I have to take stock of the fact Sexton wasn't playing against France. Gibson Park's come in. Look, he's a serviceable 9, but he's not Conor Murray. You know, so there are going to be bits after this to get chatted about as to whether or not who's played well and who hasn't, and is this coming together for Andy Farrell? But look, I mean, after the first 2 games, I mean, I was one of the ones that was really critical of Andy Farrell, and I still am. I don't think he's the answer. But, you know, his campaign, if he beats England, the argument will be that they were, you know, a Billy Burns missed penalty goal and a Billy Burns missed kick at the Wales game away from potentially winning the Six Nations. And that's how the narrative will go. If he loses this, then it'll be a case of lost to Wales, lost to France, lost to England. Not good enough.
Similarly for England, Miles, it's going to be a really interesting match for them. As you said, just like Ireland, they've lost to this tournament. It's been a little bit stop-start for them. How do you think they're going to be looking going into this weekend, given their form over the Six Nations?
I mean, it's been a strange Six Nations for England. I must say, you know, start with a loss to Scotland, and they just didn't look. They didn't have any plan going forward there. Italy, you know, May Watson scored some really good tries. They looked really good that day, but the Welsh performance was just, I mean, the second half against Wales was horrendous. I thought, you know, one of the worst halves I've seen under Eddie Jones. But last week, excellent in the forwards, excellent in the backs, and, you know, we were really strong up front, England were. This game, I think, is the same as Jeremy says, this will actually define England's Six Nations. At the end of the day, I mean, the side he's put out for Saturday, Daly starting at centre, that is Eddie Jones likes to, mix things up a little. I think Daly's future, could be at that position. You know, he's quite a dynamic player, and he'll bring a left-footed kicking game. It's quite gutting that Henry Sayers is out, and it'll be a real big aerial kicking contest against the Irish on Saturday. And I mean, it'd be interesting to see who, with Joe Marchant on the bench, he's played some rugby in New Zealand. I'll be interested to see how, if he gets on, what impact he'll bring.
You mentioned Joe Marchant coming in there on the bench. One person who has yet again been omitted is Paolo Adogwu. He's now gone 11 weeks without a minute of rugby since he's been in the bubble with England. Xander and Miles, what have you guys made of how England have handled him? Do you think there's a future there, or do you think Eddie Jones was just saying, look, Italy, I'm keeping him for this Six Nations, so you can't cap him?
I want to be positive and feel that's not how it was made. And in fairness, Paolo Dogru, I know from experience, the Lensbury is a really nice hotel, so I'm sure he would have had a really nice time in the last couple of weeks. There have been rumours he's had a slight knock. That's why he didn't go back to Wasp last week. So I'm hoping that that's possibly why. But yeah, I do really feel for him if there wasn't a knock there, because especially in that Friday night game, which against Bath, just before the squad was announced, which I think cemented his place in the squad. He was absolutely electric, and it's been a real shame not to see him involved at all over this tournament.
He's certainly a player who played himself into the squad off the back of a string of, superb performances for Wasps. He was lighting it up in the Premiership, before he came into the bubble. He was, most meters of any back, most broken tackles, most defenders beaten. He was a real handful on the right wing. Looking at the forward pack, guys, I'm just wondering what you think about Luke Cowan-Dickie retaining that 2 shirt. Jamie George is a lion, a starting lion at that. He's, been a stalwart of the England side for the last 4 years under Eddie Jones since he replaced Dylan Hartley. Is this a changing of the guard, Luke Cowan-Dickie starting, or do you guys think that as Jamie George starts to play more in a Saracen side that hopefully get promoted to the Premiership again, or hopefully not if you're anyone but a Saracens fan, do you think the more Jamie George plays, the more likely he is to retain that starting jersey, or do you think Cowan-Dickie's got it nailed down and it's his to lose?
I think it's a really difficult one. I think if you look back to 2017, Jones almost did, after that line short tour, shift the guard. So Rob Shaw went out, wasn't really seen again. Mike Brown didn't really play much again afterwards. And these were influential players in the first 2 years of Jones's tenure. So I'm not sure as to whether this is the same thing happening again. I think there will be a bit of turnover of players. I'm not sure if Jamie George is going to be one of the victims there. But in fairness to Luke Cowan-Dickie, he's just been playing really well. And I think there was clear impetus when he came off the bench against Scotland. He got the start against Italy, but that was more a rotational thing. And again, although England didn't play particularly well in the second half against Wales, I think Cowan-Dickie did have a bit of a step up. I think Jamie George was suffering from not playing many games recently and was a little bit cold. And I think he was phenomenal last weekend. So I don't see how Jones could have dropped Cowan-Dickie this weekend. I almost feel the two are fairly interchangeable because they're both really high quality players. But I think, as I said, he played so well at the back end last weekend that I don't think Cowan-Dickie could have been dropped for this one.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Cowan-Dickie, he's such an explosive player, as you say. He sort of suited that finisher role a bit earlier on in his career, but he's added a very good line-out throw to his game. Miles, England's attack, you spoke about how disappointed you were in that Scotland game. What's been your opinion on how it's developed and, how it's looking for the future?
I mean, England's back play, I think, has developed really well over the course of the Six Nations. But I think the big impact that's happened for England in terms of that back line, I think bringing in Max Malins, through this championship, he's been I think a lot of people have been banging on the door for some time about, he's a really good player, for Bristol, who are flying high in the Premiership, of course. Him at fullback, he looked really good last week against France. Watson is in the form of his life, and Johnny May, to me, is like the one guy who's never had a bad game for England under Eddie Jones. I think he's been one of the most consistent players in Eddie Jones's tenure whenever he started. In terms of the centre partnership, Elliot Daly is starting this weekend. I feel kind of sorry for Ollie Lawrence throughout most of this championship. I mean, didn't get much ball during the Scotland game. Took about an hour to basically get a touch. And I think their backline has, developed over this championship. Jones, I think, has really worked on that They worked on that pretty well. England have, especially going to the France game, you can see absolute clear improvement. And I think, they could prove too strong for Ireland on Saturday. Yeah,
just building on that point that Miles made about Daly playing in the centres. I've for a while, I think most people don't feel he's a 15. He played on the wing and was very good, but I've always felt his best position was centre. And so I almost feel Jones didn't didn't want to move him, was almost too stubborn to move him in the eyes of the media, brought Max Malins in, has now had this great opportunity in the injury of Henry Slade to play Daly, who he clearly loves and no one's denying he's a superb player. That I now think that, similar to the Ford Farrell axis, which he almost stumbled upon, I think he could have stumbled upon a sensational centre pairing, which we could see going forward for years to come. As Miles mentioned earlier, the left boot is invaluable. The fact that he can slot a penalty from inside his own half is always valuable at this level. And he has out and out pace, which you can't replace at international level. Although Slade hasn't done anything wrong apart from pick up an injury, I think if he goes well this weekend, this could be a combination we see going forward.
It's his first start at outside centre since 2016. So it'll be interesting to see if he does just fit in seamlessly. He seemed a little bit cold. He seemed one of the Saracens players who was, took a little bit more time to get up to match sharpness when he did play at 15. But hopefully after, spending such a long time in the bubble, he'll have adapted and he'll be able to hit the ground running on Saturday. I'd just be quite interested to hear your opinions on where you think the two sides will look to target each other, and if there's any potential weaknesses that you think the English or Irish teams will look to exploit in their opposition.
I think obviously, Miles mentioned that. The staple of the Irish game is going to be that kick and chase. So, I will expect very early on that Ireland will test England's back three, and you will get probably in the first 10 minutes of Ireland have the ball for 6 minutes. There probably will be about 3 or 4 kicks, which will just be straight up and unders. The likes of Keenan, Stockdale, obviously Earls, they will try and get those guys under the high ball. I think Hugo Keenan's been brilliant under the high ball this entire tournament, and it's no surprise people with the Gaelic background are good in the air. So it's a staple of Ireland's offense. They didn't do it as much against Scotland as they did against France. Against France, I felt every time they got momentum, they just kicked the ball away. So I think they will go after England that way. In terms of just looking where Ireland might see England's weaknesses, I think it might be the pack. I still think Ireland might look at England saying their pack's not at 110%. It's definitely getting there, but it's not quite at 110%. So I think they will target it. I still think they will believe that the likes of Ty Byrne can match Mario Itoje, that their back row is still top 3 in the world. They're going to believe that. So I think the up and under in the pack is where Ireland really will have a go against England on this weekend.
I do agree with Jeremy on the whole. I think the as is in any game of rugby, the forwards is so important. I feel if Ireland don't win the forward battle, I can't really see them winning. I think if England don't win the forward battle, I could still see them edging it if their backs play exceptionally well. But as you mentioned, Ty Byrne, he's played himself onto the Lions tour if it goes ahead, and arguably played himself into a starting berth for the Test. I really think he's been that good, and his versatility to play in the second row or back row, I think is a real standout. I think in terms of how England are going to target Ireland, I think although Aki and Henshaw are a lot more manoeuvrable than people perhaps give them credit for, I think Ford and Farrell will target them, and especially with Daly running alongside them, I think there could be they could get a bit of joy in shifting those centres around and then unleashing the back three, as Miles mentioned. May and Watson are both in sensational forms.
I think that I think with the forward battle for England is so crucial. Itoje, I think, massive improvement last game after giving so many penalties away against Wales. And as for me, one of England's great back rows is Tom Curry. I think he's just been outstanding this whole tournament, and he was outstanding last week against France. For me, he was my man of the match last week. I know the broadcasters spoke to a different one, but he was my man of the match last week. He's just absolutely phenomenal at number 7. He's got that Lions 7 jersey, I think, sewn up probably. And just hearing Matt Proudfoot today, he said he could develop into to match the great Richie McCaw, and he's not wrong. I think Curry is just, for 22 years old, he's just in the form of his life at the moment.
I'm just wondering, is Johnny May playing? He's playing blindside, isn't he, on the weekend?
Yeah, he's on the left wing on the 11.
I reckon they will go after Keith Earls with him, because Keith Earls will be playing right wing So I have a funny feeling once or twice they will try and get Johnny May one-on-one with Keith Earls, because if there's one thing Keith Earls can't really do, it's tackle. I mean,
it's quite an important thing.
I mean, last week, I know Van der Merwe is big, but Keith Earls literally looked at him, and it was kind of like one of those ones of, if I don't try and tackle him, they will score. So I would look like I tried to tackle him. So then I can just say, well, he's just bigger and he just bounced me, when it was really one of the most horrendous attempts at a tackle I'd ever seen. So he's the weakness. If you want, I mean, Stockdale obviously as well. He's not played a lot of international rugby over the last couple of months, and obviously when he has played, he's been pretty poor. So he's just back from injury. Does look like he's back to his best, but international rugby is different than playing the Gwent Dragons. I think the two wingers is where they will go. I think Xander's right. I think they will look especially at that anything from 12 outside. That's where they're going to go. They know in tight, and from the 10 channel in, that's where Ireland's strength is that defence. That pack is well drilled.
That Ireland-England game is going to be definitely one to watch, kicking off at 4:45 on Saturday. We're going to hear from Matthew Southcombe and Veronique Landew now about the France v Wales game, so that's coming up next. Joining us today on the Sports Gazette Six Nations podcast, we've got two guests. First up, Matthew Southcombe from Wales Online. Thanks for joining us today, Matthew. How are you?
No problems. I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you on. And our other guest is Veronique Landew, the host of the French Rugby Connections podcast. How are you doing, Veronique?
I'm very well. And guess what? I just had a chat on my podcast with Scott Kinnell half an hour ago. So I had great fun speaking with him.
Oh, I can imagine. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the insight from that then. Pleasure to have you both on today. Looking forward to speaking all about Six Nations so far. I guess, given Wales's performances so far, we should probably start with Wales, Matthew. It's been an incredible tournament for them. One I wouldn't say many predicted. They were 50-1 on for a Grand Slam at the beginning of the tournament. What do you think's changed from the autumn to allow them to get into this position?
Yeah, it's been quite a turnaround. And as you say, not one that many people were predicting, and certainly not in Wales either, to be honest with you. There's been a couple of things, really. I think, given the recent performances, you start to see the autumn campaign through a slightly different lens. You see Jonathan Humphreys, the forwards coach, talking this week about how they felt like they couldn't say it enough during the autumn, that it was a more of an experimental series for them. But the performances weren't great, and there was significant concern. People calling for Wayne Pivac to go. But I think what you've had in the Six Nations is a couple of key players come back from injury. Ken Owens mainly. George North has found form, and he's proven to be a really big part of Wales at the moment. And I think you've got the consistency of selection too. In the autumn it was a different team every week. There was different scrum half. I think he used, every week it was a different scrum half. Every week there was a different hooker. There was no sort of time or chance for anyone to build relationships. And when you're trying to implement a new style of play as well, that's not going to be conducive to that sort of progress. So I think what you've seen is just a consistency of selection. And I think when Wales get going in a tournament like the Six Nations, they can be difficult to stop. And there's enough experience in that side now, and enough players who have been in this situation before, that once they get going, they know how to keep going. So I think what you've seen is it's just that consistency of selection, and they've been fortunate with injuries, been fortunate with a few refereeing decisions as well, of course. When all that comes together, it tends to result in a good campaign.
Yeah, definitely. I think Wales have surprised a lot of people, and as you say, it does come down to sort of consistency of selection, a nice balance between experienced heads and slightly younger, fresher players. France, Veronique, obviously have picked from the Autumn Nations, they were pipped at the final hurdle by England, having picked essentially a C team. They've continued to pick a really young team for the Six Nations, and I thought it worked really well, but they came a cropper against England. What have you made of their Six Nations campaign so far?
Little bit of a hiccup in Twickenham last week, unfortunately. We were winning up until the last 10 minutes, where the French team, lost focus, got really, really tired. And I think that Fabien Galtier may have made a mistake in not releasing 3 players from the bench, such as Baptiste Rhin could have replaced Antoine Dupont. There are 2 other players. Yes, Chelonge could have brought some speed, some room to the team, but that would have meant replacing the captain. And Tamac could have been given his chance, but having said that, Jalibert did had a pretty decent game. So I think it's going to be war next week. On Saturday. From what I've read in L'Équipe and Midi Olympique and my various conversations with some French journalists as well, the French team is very eager to make. To win that competition. They see it as a major milestone in their campaign. This time, unfortunately, not to win the Grand Chelem, but the tournament. So Jalibert did say, we lost the battle, but we haven't lost the war. So to be continued. So it's going to be it's going to be a cracking game, and I'm hoping that this time, he will let the finishers or the bench a bit earlier than he did, previously.
Yeah, that's very true. I think for both sides, we've seen how important the bench has been throughout the Six Nations. Obviously, Wales, Callum Sheedy came on against England and seemed to have ice in his veins, and just performed so superbly. And then when you think of the French bench, as you said earlier, Veronique Landew not coming on last week, how important do you both see the role of the bench in this game? Do you think it's going to come down to the last 15 minutes and they're going to decide it?
I think that Fabien Galtier and Rafael Ibanez will review the situation. Hopefully they will be more astute. The reason why they didn't use the bench this time in Twickenham is apparently because it worked well when they played against Ireland. So I think they didn't want to rock the boat. It's up until 4 minutes, and the last 10 minutes were not very, very pretty. But up until 4 minutes, we were dominating. It was in the bag, which is a bit frustrating, very, very frustrating. So I'm hoping that there will be some changes earlier. And why not replacing Dupont? Let's not forget 12 players of the French team were infected by COVID. 2 weeks ago. So it's a tall. It's tall order for them to play for 80 minutes non-stop. I don't think it was fair towards the end. I think they got tired despite their fitness.
How impactful do you think that COVID break and cancellation was on the squad? Do you think it almost stifled some of the momentum that they were building?
A little bit. I think it did break the momentum because let's say for Dupont and for majority of the squad, the last game they played was on the 14th of February, so a month ago. So they lost a little, some of their game time. Some of them were able to play in the club, back in the clubs, but it did break the rhythm. But c'est la vie. That's all I can say. And so if we win the tournament, I'll be happy.
Just on that, Veronique, what's the sort of reaction amongst the players been towards Galtier? Because he was the one who broke sort of COVID rules. Has there been sort of any backlash, or have they been very much just that's in the past, let's get on with the job at hand?
What happens in Marcoussis stays in Marcoussis. Marcoussis is their training center. They keep everything on the wraps. So I haven't had any feedback, but this sort of thing happened. But yes, they need to move on. It's an experience.
Yeah, I guess we'll realise this weekend, won't we? We'll find out.
And Matthew, just if we look at the game at Twickenham from a Welsh perspective, what do you think the desired outcome would have been? Would you want France to be going into the game this weekend hurting from a loss, or would you rather had a Grand Slam showdown between France and yourselves based on 4 wins each?
Well, I'm not sure one is any preferable to the other, to be honest. I mean, Normally you would say that you would prefer France to be going in having lost at Twickenham like they did, because you would say that maybe it would knock their confidence slightly. But I don't get the impression that defeat will. France are now a very impressive outfit, and Wales are going to be very much aware of the challenges that they pose. That sort of back line, once it gets going, there are so many little magicians and big magicians in there as well. So I don't think either result is particularly preferable. I mean, if you look at the table, now Wales are 9 points ahead. I know France have got that game against Scotland in hand. But, if you had said to anybody in Wales that they would be in this position 6 weeks, 7 weeks ago, then you'd have probably been laughed at. So, I guess in terms of the competition as it stands, a defeat for Wales was great because it just strengthens their position. France losing at Twickenham just strengthens Wales's position in the table. But I don't think it really is going to have too much of an impact on what's going to play out on Saturday.
I have to differ on your comments. When I spoke with Scott Quinnell earlier, he did say he did believe in the success of Wales, getting all the way to the Grand Slam. But passionate man, I don't know. Maybe
he's always optimistic, Scott Quinnell.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah. So, but I have to say, no, you just regarding where you are, Wales, you did obviously Lady Luck played a massive role in your first two games. Do you agree with that? Yeah,
it's tough to disagree with that. I wouldn't.
Yes, and then it was a perfect way for the Welsh team to build their confidence that way, and to believe in themselves. And now it's up for grabs. So may the best win next week, all the way for France. I hope that it's going to be a cracking game in any case.
Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah, definitely. I'm really excited for this game. I've got to say, I think this is the two, obviously the form side and the best side to watch, I would say, in France. As Matthew said, when that back line gets going, it is incredibly difficult to stop. I think anything off first phase in Wales 22 is going to be difficult to defend. What do you both see as the key battlegrounds for this weekend? Personally, I think the centres is going to be a huge clash of titans, really. North, Davies and North for Wales, and I'd love to see Fiku and Vakatawa starting again. What is your opinion on the key battlegrounds for this weekend from both of you guys?
Yeah, I'll go first. And I'd agree that the centre is probably a good place to start. But I guess for me, I think from a Welsh point of view, it's going to be about control. I don't see if the game opens up and becomes quite loose and fast, then I think it favours France. So I think Dan Biggar and Gareth Davis, if he starts, will have major roles to play there. I think Biggar is the perfect man to just slow everything down, make sure Wales are in the right parts of the field. It's probably going to be a one for the purists from a Welsh point of view. But they're just going to want to put France back in their own half regularly and try and smother them. I think if you give France a foothold in your half, they can cause some real problems. So I think the halfbacks are going to have a huge role to play in terms of where the game is played and the speed that it's played at. And obviously, on the other side of that, you've got Antoine Dupont and Jalibert or Intermac, world-class players who can cause major problems. So I think the halfbacks are going to be key for different reasons.
The same. I am of the same opinion. I think this is where the battle will play. But having said that, anything can happen, because when England was playing in France, I was expecting more like a kicking game, and I was very astounded that it was such a fast-paced, such a brilliant game on Saturday. So who knows? But yeah, I agree with you. Center needs to be watched. Mm-hmm.
And of course, you touched on Dupont there. I myself am a massive Dupont fan, as Alex will know. I've been singing his praises for over a year or so, and I'm happy that now everyone else has jumped on the bandwagon. Matthew, how do you think Wales go around stopping who is a player who's arguably the best player in the world right now?
Well, the best way is to not let him get the ball. Control possession, basically. Try and disrupt the breakdown as much as you can. But you've just got to be alert as well. I think with players like that, it's just going to be about, like I said at the start, controlling possession, keeping hold of the ball for long periods. That's not necessarily going from touchline to touchline. It's probably just looking after the ball for 20, 25, 30 phases at a time. That takes a lot out of a defence. But more than anything, it just means that he can't get his hands on the ball. Inevitably there will be times in a game when France and Wales, the momentum swings and France will get on top at some point. And it's just about limiting the damage in those periods. And I just think if Wales can create issues at the breakdown, disrupt the platform a little bit, then that will go some way to sort of looking after that threat. But he's, as you touched on, he is a world-class player, and world-class players will always find a way to cause problems. So you've just got to watch him so carefully. But as he's proven time and time again in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, he's very difficult to stop.
Actually, I spotted him 3 years ago, and I remember going to a Six Nations launch, and I spoke with Jacques Brunel, who was the coach of France, and I said to him, "You know what? Antoine Dupont, he plays for Toulouse. He's really, really good. One to watch." But anyway, that's my 5 cents regarding when he got spotted on. But you know what? Antoine Dupont and all the others, they're not the finished product yet. It's work in progress. As you gathered, during the second half last week, they made some mistakes that did cost them dearly. So that's why they need to really improve their discipline. And Fabien Gatier did say, they got, in French, you say, ils se sont grisés. They got carried away, when Dupont, scored the first try after 61 minutes and 17 seconds, I believe. But the English were very quick to respond. They did show some, so a little bit more experience. They got more caps, obviously. Still a very, very young team. Lots to learn. But it was a learning experience. But yes, it's not the finished product. But yeah, it's sometime. I wish they would have won, because we need to win some silverware. And but having said that, last year the first match in the Six Nations was against Wales, and they lost. It was 23-7. I think that Wales was very, very surprised of the score. That was the first time that Gatier played this young team. They were all young kids, 24 years old, advantage. Now they gain more experience. So we'll see whether the French are going to slay the dragon. Is that it's a question, would be a question of the rooster versus the dragon.
And you touched briefly there on saying you think it's important that France win something. Is there not perhaps an argument saying that for such a young team, maybe facing a bit of failure could do them good in the long run? Or do you think it's really vital that they do, if not win the championship, at least stop Wales from getting the Grand Slam this weekend?
They need to win something, because if you look back at last year, they lost because of points differences, against the English. So that was their first defeat, and we all know what happened during the Autumn Nation. We got robbed by a certain referee. And it's about time. Fabien really wants. I mean, Fabien Gatier was playing in one of the most successful teams, in the 90s, 2000s. So he wants to instill, that the victory in his players. I think it's important. Psychologically, it's very important.
The final thing we need to ask both of you is your predictions for the weekend. I can imagine what you're both going to say, but it'd be good if you could just sort of give us a victor and then a points margin of difference.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go first. So Wales have got a decent record against France in recent years. I think up until 2020, they'd won something like 8 out of the 9 matches previously. So Warren Gatland had a very good sort of feel for that game. I know things might have gone differently in Japan if there wasn't an elbow thrown. But obviously Wayne Pivac hasn't beaten France, and they came close in the Six Nations last year, but France probably deserved it. And then in the autumn, they were nowhere near. So, France pose a lot of challenges. They've got high quality players in every position, and I know it's been a cliche knocked around, but they don't seem to be that side that's got this self-destruct button in them anymore. So that it's going to be a tough one. I would back Wales, obviously, being Welsh, but like I said before, they're on a roll. I've seen this before with Wales. When they get going, there's just so many experienced players in there: Alan Wynne-Jones, Ken Owens, George North, Jonathan Davis. You're looking at the Lions tours, the Grand Slams, the Six Nations that they've won. They've been here before. The only difference this time round is that Wales have got to go away from home and win the Grand Slam. They've never won certainly not in the last sort of decade, won a Grand Slam going away from home. I know the fact that there are no fans in the stadium will mitigate things slightly, but it's still going to be a challenge. You've still got to travel. You've still got to be stuck in your hotel room because of COVID. It's all a very peculiar scenario. So, the one nagging doubt is that, they've got to go away. France are a very, very good side. It wouldn't surprise me if France won. I think it'll be a close game, so I would go for a 3-point Welsh win. 24-21, something like that.
Well, for me, it's about time that the luck of the Welsh goes to the French one, especially with last week's with Maro Itoje, hand of God. No, I can't say hand of God. It's slightly controversial. Was it a try? Wasn't it a try? I don't know. We'll see. But I got last year Wales won. No, sorry. Last year France won 27-23. So you know what? I'm going to stick around the same.
Yeah, I think Veronique raises a very good point there as well. By the way, because Wales, there was the red card in the Scotland and the Ireland game. They probably had the rub of the green in the England game with their first 2 tries. Now, I don't think there's a Six Nations that's ever been won without that. But if they don't beat France on Saturday, then that will be. Well, you only beat Ireland because they had a red card, and you only beat Scotland because they had a red card. I think it's really important for Wayne Pivac. This campaign has saved his job pretty much. Now, if they don't win on Saturday, then suddenly those doubts will start creeping back in again, which sounds ridiculous because they got a bonus point in Scotland. They put 40 points on England, who before this championship were the second best team in the world and favourites for the whole thing. So it sounds bizarre, but I really think it's an important game for Pivac, not just because of the silverware, but in the context of, right now he's starting to look like the real deal. But if they don't win on Saturday, then there will still be a few doubts.
And France haven't I wouldn't say they fully clicked yet in this tournament, and I'm not saying they will do on Saturday, but if they were to fully click on Saturday, there is a chance it could get quite ugly. Is there a nagging doubt that could happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about, the symbol of French rugby, it's a rooster. And guess what a rooster does? A rooster fights until it dies. So, so I will be eating some of your leeks. Is it leeks?
Yeah, leeks.
No, seriously speaking, there's lots at stake. French Les Bleus have been extremely disappointed by the loss in Twickenham. So it's time. It's a question of honor for them, to put things right. So I think it's going to be a very brutal, passionate, rather aggressive, and cracking game.
And briefly, just one word answer from each of you. If Wales don't win on Saturday, who wins the championship?
I think Wales still win.
Yeah, of course you would say that. Well, Mount, so you can gather. So yes, time for France to win the competition. You won the Grand Slam 2 years ago, so don't. It's been 10 years that France won the Grand Slam, so obviously won't win it this year. But if we can win the tournament, I think it will bring lots of people to pay more attention to the French game, because obviously French team before Gatier, they didn't play very well at all. It was always very inconsistent. Whereas now we've got a good team on board. And I have to say thank you, Sean Edwards.
That was our gift to you.
Yeah, well, actually, the reason why he wanted the Welsh Rugby Union only offered him 2 years contract, 2 years
That's
extension,
right, yeah.
and the French one offered him four or 5 years. So he went to France, of course.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of people in Wales that are still very disappointed that the Welsh Rugby Union let that happen.
C'est la vie, but France, and he's having a ball there. He speaks French now. He trains his team, in French. He does his PowerPoint in French. So yeah, it's done a massive difference.
Yeah, he's certainly made a big difference. Gethin Jenkins has not done too badly on the Welsh side of things either, though. But yeah, Sean Edwards is certainly seeming to make France at home. He's living in Montpellier, I believe, and really enjoying it there. So that's good. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, for both joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you on.
No problem.
Anytime.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
backing them to stay in the tournament.